Maya Chen sat alone in the corner of the university cafeteria, her untouched sandwich growing stale as she stared at her quantum mechanics textbook. Around her, groups of students laughed and chatted, their voices creating a wall of sound that somehow made her feel even more invisible. At 22, she had grown accustomed to being overlooked, dismissed, and forgotten. "Did you see Professor Williams completely ignore Maya's question again today?" whispered Jessica from the table behind her. "I mean, can you blame him? She's so weird. Always talking about impossible theories and asking those strange questions about dimensional physics," replied Marcus, his voice carrying just loud enough for Maya to hear. Maya's fingers tightened around her pen. The question she had asked wasn't strange at all. She had been trying to understand why current human technology couldn't detect the subtle energy signatures she had been calculating in her personal research. Her professors called her theories creative fiction, and her classmates simply called her crazy. The truth was, Maya had always seen patterns others couldn't. As a child, she would point at empty spaces and insist something was there. Her parents took her to doctors, psychologists, anyone who might explain their daughter's strange behavior. The conclusion was always the same. Overactive imagination, too much science fiction, nothing to worry about. But Maya knew what she saw. In the spaces between stars, in the quantum foam of reality itself, there were structures, vast geometric forms that pulsed with an intelligence so alien that human minds simply refused to acknowledge them. She had spent years developing mathematical models to prove their existence, working alone in her tiny apartment, surviving on instant noodles and stubborn determination. Her thesis advisor, Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, was the only person who showed even the slightest interest in her work, though Maya suspected it was more out of pity than genuine scientific curiosity. Dr. Hawthorne was nearing retirement and had taken on Maya as a final project, perhaps hoping to guide one last student toward a more conventional path. "Maya, dear, you need to focus on achievable goals," Dr. Hawthorne had said during their last meeting. "These extra-dimensional detection theories of yours are fascinating, but they're not going to get you a job at NASA or any major research facility. Perhaps consider something more practical, like improving satellite communication systems." Maya had nodded politely, but inside her resolve only strengthened. She knew she was right. The mathematics were too elegant, too perfect to be mere coincidence. Something vast and intelligent existed just beyond human perception, and she was going to prove it. Her isolation wasn't just academic. Maya had learned early that being different meant being alone. In high school, she had tried to fit in, dumbing down her insights and pretending to care about the same things as her classmates. But the act was exhausting, and eventually she gave up trying. It was easier to be invisible than to be constantly reminded that she didn't belong. The cafeteria began to empty as afternoon classes approached. Maya packed her things, her movements mechanical and practiced. She had 3 more classes today. Advanced theoretical physics, where Professor Williams would continue to ignore her raised hand. Quantum computing, where her lab partner would reluctantly work with her while checking his phone every few minutes. And astrophysics, where she would sit in the back row and take notes on theories that felt incomplete to her trained mind. As she walked across campus, Maya's thoughts drifted to her latest calculations. She had been working on a detection algorithm that could identify the energy signatures she believed were all around them. The math suggested that these entities operated on frequencies just outside human sensory range, like radio waves before humans developed the technology to detect them. Her apartment was a testament to her obsession. Every wall was covered with equations, star charts, and dimensional models that would look like abstract art to anyone else. Her computer ran continuously, processing data from public astronomical databases, searching for the anomalies she knew were there. That evening, as Maya sat cross-legged on her floor surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups, her computer chimed with an alert. Her detection program had found something, not just an anomaly but a pattern. A massive structure moving through space, following trajectories that defied conventional physics. Her hands trembled as she pulled up the data. The readings were impossible. An object the size of a small moon was approaching Earth's solar system, but it wasn't appearing on any official monitoring systems. It was invisible to conventional sensors, detectable only by the subtle gravitational distortions it created in the quantum field. Maya spent the next 48 hours verifying her findings, running the calculations over and over, checking for errors that never appeared. The object was real, it was massive, and it was coming closer. According to her projections, it would reach Earth's orbit within 6 months. She tried calling Dr. Hawthorne, but her advisor was at a conference in Switzerland. Maya left increasingly frantic voicemails, trying to explain her discovery without sounding completely insane. She sent emails to NASA, to SETI, to every research institution she could find. The responses were polite but dismissive. A graduate student's theoretical calculations weren't enough to warrant serious investigation. As days passed, Maya watched the object's approach with growing anxiety. Her detection algorithm revealed more details with each passing hour. The structure wasn't natural. Its geometry was too perfect, too purposeful. It was clearly artificial, clearly intelligent, and clearly not human. She tried once more to reach out to the scientific community, this time including her complete mathematical models and detection algorithms. The response was swift and crushing. Professor Williams himself sent her a formal email, suggesting she take a break from her studies and seek counseling for what he termed academic stress-induced delusions. Maya stared at the email for a long time, her reflection ghost-like on her computer screen. The face looking back at her was thin, tired, marked by months of isolation and ridicule, but behind her exhaustion, her eyes still burned with conviction. She might be alone, she might be ignored, but she was not wrong. That night, as she sat watching the stars from her tiny balcony, Maya made a decision. If the world wouldn't listen to her warnings, she would prepare on her own. Whatever was coming, whatever these entities wanted, she would be ready. The girl everyone ignored, the student everyone dismissed, would be humanity's only early warning system. She had no idea that in 6 months, the entire galaxy would know her name. The alien ship materialized in Earth's orbit at 3:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time on a Tuesday that would forever divide human history into before and after. Maya Chen was the only person on the planet who wasn't surprised. She had been tracking the vessel for 3 months, watching as it decelerated from relativistic speeds using technology that made human fusion rockets look like stone tools. Her detection algorithms had mapped its approach trajectory down to the minute. But when she tried to warn government agencies, her calls were routed to automated systems and her emails disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. The world's reaction was predictable chaos. Every major telescope on Earth swung toward the massive structure that had simply appeared where empty space had been moments before. News networks scrambled to explain the impossible. Military commanders issued contradictory orders. World leaders demanded answers from scientists who had no answers to give. Maya watched the global panic unfold from her apartment, surrounded by months of calculations that suddenly seemed prophetic rather than delusional. Her phone had been ringing constantly since the ship's appearance, but she ignored it. The same people who had dismissed her as crazy now wanted her data, her theories, her insights. Too little, too late. The alien vessel defied every assumption about space travel and engineering. It was beautiful in an unsettling way. Like a crystalline flower the size of Manhattan, its surfaces shifting and flowing as if the hull itself was alive. Maya's instruments detected energy patterns beyond human comprehension. Power sources that operated on principles physics textbooks insisted were impossible. Dr. Hawthorne finally reached her on the 3rd day after first contact. Her former advisor sounded exhausted and desperate. "Maya, please, you have to help us. Your detection algorithms are the only things that seem to work on this ship. NASA is forming an emergency response team and they need your research." Maya laughed, but there was no humor in it. 3 months ago, you told me to seek counseling. Professor Williams called my work academic delusions. Now you want my help? Maya, I'm sorry. We were wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. But this is bigger than academic politics. Humanity needs you. The alien ship had been broadcasting continuously since its arrival, but the signals were unlike anything in human experience. They weren't radio waves or laser communications. Instead, they were multidimensional quantum pulses that seemed to exist in several layers of reality simultaneously. Every attempt to decode them had failed spectacularly. Maya had been analyzing the transmissions using her own theoretical framework, and patterns were beginning to emerge. The aliens weren't just sending one message. They were sending thousands, each one tailored to different levels of technological and cognitive development. It was like a cosmic standardized test, designed to measure the receiving civilization's capabilities. They're not trying to communicate with us, Maya explained to the hastily assembled team of experts who had finally, grudgingly acknowledged her expertise. They're trying to understand us. Every response we send back teaches them more about human technology, human psychology, human limitations. General Morrison, the Pentagon's representative, leaned forward in his chair. Are they hostile? Maya considered the question carefully. Her analysis suggested something far more complex than simple aggression. I don't think they consider us sophisticated enough to be hostile toward. It would be like us declaring war on an ant colony. The room fell silent. Maya continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. Based on their communication patterns, they've done this before. Many times. They arrive at developing civilizations, evaluate their potential, and then make a decision. What kind of decision? Asked Dr. Petrov, the SETI representative. Maya's data painted a chilling picture. The quantum signatures embedded in the alien transmissions contained fragments of other communications, echoes of previous encounters. She had identified at least 17 distinct technological signatures from civilizations that were no longer transmitting. They're gardeners, she said finally. They tend the galaxy like we tend a farm. Some species they nurture and guide toward greater development. Others, she gestured to her computer screen, where the dead signals from extinct civilizations scrolled endlessly. Others they harvest. The next week was a blur of emergency meetings, desperate planning sessions, and failed communication attempts. World governments tried everything from mathematical proofs to artistic expressions, but the alien ship remained silent to conventional contact methods. Only Maya's quantum detection algorithms could penetrate their shielding and decode their true messages. What she found terrified her. The aliens, who called themselves the architects, had been monitoring human development for millennia. They had watched human civilization grow from scattered tribes to a global technological society, and they were not impressed. Humanity was classified as a marginal species, with limited expansion potential. The architects had a simple philosophy. Resources were finite, space was precious, and only civilizations with true potential deserved to inherit the galaxy. They had perfected the art of evaluation, testing species across multiple dimensions of development. Technology was only one factor. They also measured creativity, adaptability, cooperation, and something they called transcendence probability. Maya spent sleepless nights decoding their evaluation criteria, watching as humanity failed test after test. Human technology was centuries behind their expectations. Human cooperation was laughably primitive. Human creativity showed promise but lacked the fundamental paradigm shifts the architects deemed necessary for galactic citizenship. Were failing, she reported to the increasingly desperate Emergency Council. Every response we send confirms their assessment that we're not ready for advancement. They've classified us as a developmental dead end. General Morrison's face was grim. How long do we have? Maya's calculations were brutally precise. Based on their previous evaluation protocols, 3 weeks. They'll spend that time confirming their assessment, then they'll begin the harvesting process. Harvesting how? Maya pulled up her analysis of the architect ship's internal structure. What humanity had assumed was a single vessel was actually a mobile ecosystem, a self-contained civilization capable of strip mining entire star systems. When they harvested a species, they didn't just eliminate them. They absorb their resources, their knowledge, even their biological uniqueness. They'll dismantle Earth systematically, Maya explained, extract useful materials, preserve interesting genetic samples, archive cultural artifacts for study. From their perspective, it's merciful. We'll become part of something greater instead of dying out naturally. The room erupted in angry voices and desperate suggestions, military strikes, diplomatic overtures, attempts to hide human civilization or convince the architects of humanity's potential. Maya listened to the chaos with growing frustration. These people still didn't understand what they were facing. You're all thinking like humans, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. That's exactly why we're failing their tests. They're not evaluating our weapons or our diplomacy. They're evaluating our ability to transcend our limitations. Dr. Hawthorne looked at her former student with new respect. What do you mean? Maya stood and walked to the whiteboard, beginning to sketch out the mathematical relationships she had discovered. The architects don't advance civilizations by giving them technology. They advance them by forcing them to evolve beyond their original nature. Every species they've uplifted underwent a fundamental transformation, became something greater than what they started as. She turned back to face the room. Humanity has 3 weeks to prove we can transcend what we are. And I think I know how to do it. For the first time since the alien ship's arrival, the room was completely silent. Maya Chen, the girl everyone had ignored, the student everyone had dismissed, was about to propose a plan that would either save humanity or damn them to harvesting. Either way, the galaxy would never forget her name. Maya's proposal was audacious beyond anything the Emergency Council had imagined. While world leaders debated military responses and diplomats crafted increasingly desperate messages, she had been working on something that challenged the very foundations of human understanding. "You want to do what?" General Morrison's voice cracked slightly as he tried to process what Maya had just explained. "We're going to prove to the architects that humanity can transcend physical limitations by demonstrating quantum consciousness integration," Maya repeated calmly. "We're going to show them that human minds can exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously." Dr. Petrov rubbed his temples. "Maya, that's not even theoretically possible. Human consciousness is a biological process. You can't just quantum entangle someone's thoughts." Maya had anticipated this objection. She pulled up her research from the past week, calculations that had kept her awake for 72 straight hours. That's assuming consciousness is purely biological. But what if it's not? What if consciousness is actually a quantum field phenomenon that happens to use biological brains as an interface? The mathematics on her screen were unlike anything the assembled scientists had seen before. Maya had taken principles from quantum field theory, consciousness studies, and the architect communication protocols to develop something entirely new. It was either brilliant or completely insane. "The architects exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously," she explained, her finger tracing complex equations. "That's why our conventional detection methods couldn't find them. They don't just travel through space. They travel through layers of reality that we can't normally perceive." Dr. Hawthorne leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her skepticism. "How do you know this?" Maya's smile was tired but triumphant. "Because I've been analyzing their biological signatures. They're not physically present in our dimensional layer. What we're seeing is just a projection, a shadow of their true forms. They exist primarily in quantum superposition." The implications were staggering. If Maya was correct, the architects hadn't just developed advanced technology. They had evolved beyond the need for fixed physical forms. They existed as conscious quantum fields able to manifest in multiple realities simultaneously. "So your plan is what exactly?" asked Dr. Sarah Chen, the neuroscience consultant. "Turn human consciousness into quantum fields?" "Not turn into," Maya corrected. "Prove that we already are. Human consciousness might already exist in quantum superposition, but we're only aware of one-dimensional layer at a time. I think we can change that." Maya's research had revealed something extraordinary in the human brain's quantum microtubules. She had discovered patterns that matched the architect communication frequencies almost perfectly. It was as if human consciousness was already quantum-enabled but somehow restricted to single-dimensional awareness. "The architects aren't testing our technology," she continued. "They're testing our ability to access our own latent quantum nature. Every species they've uplifted has demonstrated this transition. The ones they've harvested never made the leap." General Morrison was clearly struggling with concepts that challenged everything he thought he knew about reality. "Even if you're right, how do we prove this to them? How do we demonstrate quantum consciousness?" Maya had been working on that problem for days. The answer was both simple and terrifying. "We establish a quantum communication link directly with their consciousness field. But to do that, someone has to voluntarily enter quantum superposition while maintaining conscious awareness." The room fell silent. What Maya was proposing was either a breakthrough in human evolution or an elaborate form of suicide. "Has this ever been attempted before?" Dr. Chen asked quietly. "No," Maya admitted, "because until now we didn't know it was possible. But I've run the calculations thousands of times. The human brain can theoretically support quantum consciousness integration. The risk is that the person might not be able to return to single-dimensional awareness afterward." Dr. Hawthorne understood the implications immediately. "You're talking about permanently altering someone's consciousness. They might become something that's no longer recognizably human." Maya nodded. "Or they might become something more than human. something that can communicate directly with the architects and prove that humanity has transcendence potential. The debate that followed was intense and desperate. Military leaders wanted to focus on defensive measures. Scientists argued for more research time. Diplomats insisted on conventional communication attempts. But Maya knew they didn't have time for conventional solutions. Every day we delay, the architects gather more evidence that we're a developmental dead end, she argued. Their evaluation protocols are designed to test species under pressure. They want to see if we can evolve when faced with extinction. Finally, Dr. Hawthorne asked the question everyone was thinking. Who would undergo this procedure? Who would risk their consciousness for the entire human race? Maya's answer surprised no one. I will. The protests were immediate and overwhelming, but Maya had already made her decision. She understood the quantum mathematics better than anyone else. She had been tracking the architects longer than anyone else, and perhaps most importantly, she had the least to lose. I've spent my entire life being ignored and dismissed, she said quietly. If I'm wrong, humanity loses one crazy graduate student. If I'm right, I might be able to save everyone. The next 72 hours were a blur of preparation and desperate engineering. Maya worked with teams of quantum physicists and neuroscientists to construct a device that could theoretically induce quantum consciousness superposition. It was built using principles derived from architect technology, combined with cutting-edge human quantum computing systems. The device looked deceptively simple. A chair surrounded by quantum field generators, connected to computers that could monitor and potentially stabilize consciousness during dimensional transition. Maya called it the quantum bridge. As the day of the attempt approached, Maya found herself surprisingly calm. She had spent her entire life searching for proof that reality was more complex than human perception suggested. Now she would have the chance to experience that complexity directly. Are you certain about this? Dr. Hawthorne asked as final preparations were completed. Maya looked at the monitoring equipment, the quantum field generators, the computers that would track her consciousness as it moved between dimensional layers. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The architect ship had remained silent for 2 weeks, its massive structure looming over Earth like a sword waiting to fall. Intelligence reports suggested they were conducting final evaluations, comparing humanity to their database of previous civilizations. Time was running out. Maya settled into the quantum bridge chair and allowed the technicians to attach the monitoring devices. Her brain activity would be tracked through quantum sensors that could theoretically follow her consciousness, even if it shifted to other dimensional layers. Remember, she said to the assembled team, if this works, I might not be able to communicate in normal human language when I return. You'll need to use the quantum detection algorithms to understand what I'm trying to tell you. Dr. Chen checked the neuroscience monitors one final time. All systems show green. Brain activity is normal. Quantum field generators are ready. Maya closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about all the years of isolation, all the dismissive comments from professors and classmates, all the nights spent alone with her calculations and theories. Everyone had ignored her because she saw patterns others couldn't. Now she would find out if those patterns were real. Initiate quantum field activation, she said quietly. The last thing Maya heard before her consciousness scattered across multiple dimensional layers was the hum of the quantum generators coming online. Then her awareness exploded beyond the boundaries of single-dimensional existence, and she found herself face to face with the true forms of the architects. They had been waiting for her. Maya's consciousness exploded across 17 different dimensional layers simultaneously, each one revealing aspects of reality that human language had no words to describe. She existed as a point of awareness scattered through quantum foam, her thoughts echoing across probability fields that stretched beyond the boundaries of normal space-time. The architects were waiting for her in a space between dimensions, their true forms vast and luminous beyond anything she had imagined. They appeared as geometric constructs of pure consciousness, patterns of thought and intention that had transcended the need for physical matter eons ago. Their communication wasn't words or images, but direct transfer of concepts and emotions. Interesting, came the first contact, a thought that resonated through every layer of Maya's scattered awareness. A human has achieved quantum consciousness transition. This was not anticipated in our evaluation protocols. Maya struggled to maintain coherence as her consciousness adapted to existing in multiple dimensional states. The sensation was overwhelming, like trying to hold 17 different conversations while solving complex mathematical equations and experiencing every emotion simultaneously. But gradually her awareness stabilized, and she found she could focus her attention on the architect presence. "You have been monitoring us," she managed to project back, her thoughts taking the form of crystalline structures in the quantum communication field. "Monitoring, evaluating, preparing for harvest termination," the architect responded. "Your species demonstrates insufficient transcendence probability. Resource allocation protocols require elimination of developmental dead ends." Through her quantum-expanded awareness, Maya could perceive the vast scope of the architect's civilization. They were ancient beyond human comprehension, having guided galactic development for millions of years. They existed primarily in quantum superposition, manifesting in physical reality only when necessary to interact with less evolved species. "You judge us by standards we never knew existed," Maya projected, her consciousness gaining strength as she adapted to multi-dimensional communication. How can we demonstrate transcendence probability when we were unaware that transcendence was possible?" The architect's response carried undertones of what might have been amusement in a less evolved species. "Awareness is the first requirement of transcendence. Your species shows minimal awareness of quantum consciousness potential. Most individuals remain trapped in single-dimensional perception." Maya realized she was humanity's representative in a trial that had already been decided. The architects weren't malicious. They were simply efficient. They had seen thousands of species fail to make the evolutionary leap to quantum consciousness, and they had developed protocols to prevent cosmic resources from being wasted on civilizations that would never transcend their biological limitations. "Show me the evaluation criteria," Maya requested, opening her quantum awareness to receive information. What flooded into her consciousness was staggering. The architects measured civilizations across dozens of development vectors. But the most important was transcendence probability, the likelihood that a species would eventually evolve beyond physical limitations and join the galactic community of quantum-conscious civilizations. Maya saw the records of species that had succeeded. They shared common characteristics: rapid adaptation under pressure, willingness to sacrifice individual survival for collective advancement, and most importantly, the ability to recognize and accept paradigm shifts that challenged their fundamental understanding of reality. She also saw the records of species that had failed. They clung to biological limitations, rejected concepts that threatened their worldview, and prioritized individual survival over evolutionary advancement. These species were harvested, their resources redistributed to more promising civilizations. "Your species shows mixed indicators," the architect continued. "Individual adaptability is high, but collective coordination remains primitive. Technological development is adequate, but lacks paradigm transcendence. Consciousness evolution probability, 17%. 17%. Maya felt her quantum awareness contract with despair. It wasn't enough. The architect threshold for species advancement was 30% transcendence probability. Humanity was marked for harvesting because they fell short of arbitrary, but apparently universal evolutionary standards. "What would it take to raise our probability rating?" Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The architect's response came with complex mathematical attachments that Maya's quantum-expanded consciousness could somehow understand. "Demonstrate that humans can achieve voluntary consciousness transcendence under collective coordination protocols. Current evaluation shows only individual transcendence potential in isolated subjects." Maya understood. Her own quantum consciousness transition proved that humans had the biological capacity for transcendence, but one person wasn't enough. The architects needed proof that humanity as a species could make the evolutionary leap, not just exceptional individuals. How many humans would need to demonstrate quantum consciousness integration? She asked. Minimum threshold: 1,000 individuals maintaining stable quantum superposition while coordinating collective action. Time limit: 7 of your solar rotations, 7 days. Maya felt her consciousness scatter across dimensional layers as she processed the impossibility of what the architects were demanding. Even if her quantum consciousness procedure could be replicated, Finding 1,000 volunteers willing to risk permanent consciousness alteration was unthinkable, and that assumed the procedure could be scaled up, which was far from certain. This requirement seems designed to ensure failure, Maya projected, her thoughts carrying undertones of frustration and despair. The requirement reflects the minimum standards for galactic citizenship, the architect replied without emotion. Species that cannot coordinate voluntary consciousness transcendence under temporal pressure demonstrate insufficient collective evolution potential. Through her quantum awareness, Maya could perceive the logical elegance of the architect evaluation system. They weren't being cruel. They were being selective. The galaxy was finite, resources were limited, and only species that could transcend their biological limitations deserved to inherit cosmic civilization. But Maya also perceived something the architects might not have expected. Her consciousness was adapting to quantum superposition faster than their models predicted. She could feel her awareness expanding, accessing layers of reality that even some architect individuals hadn't explored. Her human brain, designed for creative problem-solving and adaptive thinking, was proving remarkably compatible with quantum consciousness integration. "You're surprised by my adaptation rate," she observed, noting subtle fluctuations in the architect's communication patterns. "Your consciousness integration velocity exceeds predicted parameters," came the admission. This suggests higher individual transcendence potential than species evaluation indicated. Maya felt a spark of hope. If her consciousness could adapt this quickly, perhaps other humans could as well. But the real question was whether humanity could coordinate such a massive consciousness transition in 7 days. "I need to return to my physical form to coordinate the collective attempt," Maya projected. Quantum consciousness return carries significant risk of dimensional disintegration, the architect warned. Many individuals who achieve transition cannot successfully return to single-dimensional awareness. Maya had already considered this possibility. Her consciousness might be forever changed by the experience, unable to fully return to normal human awareness. But if she couldn't return to coordinate humanity's response, the entire species would be harvested anyway. The risk is acceptable, she decided. "Fascinating," the architect responded. "Voluntary acceptance of personal dissolution risk for species survival. This behavior pattern was not anticipated in human evaluation protocols." For the first time since entering quantum superposition, Maya smiled, the expression manifesting as geometric patterns of light across multiple dimensional layers. "Then maybe your evaluation protocols need updating." The process of returning to single-dimensional consciousness was even more traumatic than the initial transition. Maya felt her awareness compressing, vast perceptions folding back into the limited sensory range of biological existence. It was like trying to fit an ocean into a teacup. But as her consciousness settled back into her physical brain, Maya retained something extraordinary: memory of quantum dimensional structure and a deep understanding of how consciousness could transcend biological limitations. She opened her eyes in the laboratory to find Dr. Hawthorne and the research team staring at her, with expressions of desperate hope. "Did it work?" Dr. Hawthorne asked quietly. Maya looked around the room, seeing her colleagues with new awareness. She could perceive the quantum field patterns that surrounded each person, the potential for consciousness expansion that existed in every human brain. Hence, Maya's return from quantum consciousness brought both hope and devastating clarity. She now understood exactly what humanity faced, and the knowledge was almost unbearable. As she explained the architect requirements to the emergency council, she watched faces shift from desperate optimism to crushing despair. 1,000 volunteers in 7 days? General Morrison's voice was flat with disbelief. "Maya, we can barely build one functioning quantum bridge, let alone 1,000. And even if we could, who's going to volunteer for a procedure that might permanently alter their consciousness?" Maya had been considering the same problems during her hours of recovery. Her consciousness still existed partially in quantum superposition, allowing her to perceive solutions that would have been invisible to normal human awareness. The answer was both elegant and terrifying. "We don't need 1,000 quantum bridges," she explained, her voice carrying those strange dimensional harmonics that made everyone slightly uncomfortable. "Quantum consciousness is contagious under the right conditions. One person in superposition can guide others into transcendence through quantum entanglement." Dr. Chen looked skeptical. You're talking about induced collective consciousness expansion? Maya, that's completely theoretical. Everything about quantum consciousness was theoretical until yesterday, Maya replied. But I've seen how the architects coordinate their collective awareness. They exist as a connected consciousness network, thousands of individuals sharing quantum superposition states. Humans can do the same thing. The mathematics Maya presented were unlike anything the assembled scientists had encountered. She described consciousness fields that could propagate through quantum entanglement, allowing one transcended individual to guide others through the transition process. It was like quantum telepathy, but based on rigorous mathematical principles rather than mystical speculation. The key is voluntary resonance, Maya explained. The volunteers have to choose transcendence consciously and willingly. Fear or resistance breaks the quantum entanglement and prevents successful transition. Dr. Hawthorne studied the equations with growing amazement. If you're right, we could coordinate the consciousness transitions in cascading waves. Start with the most psychologically prepared individuals. Let them guide others, expand the network systematically. Maya nodded. Exactly. But we need to find 1,000 people willing to risk their humanity to save humanity, and we need to do it in 6 days. The global search for volunteers began immediately. Maya's story had leaked to the media within hours of the architect encounter, and her quantum consciousness transition was being broadcast worldwide. The response was overwhelming, but not in the way the Emergency Council had hoped. Religious leaders declared Maya's experience either divine revelation or demonic possession, depending on their theological perspectives. Scientists demanded independent verification of her claims. Conspiracy theorists insisted the entire alien encounter was an elaborate government hoax. World leaders struggled to maintain order as panic spread through major population centers, but among the chaos, volunteers began to emerge. They came from unexpected places: theoretical physicists who had spent their careers studying consciousness, meditation masters who claimed to have experienced expanded awareness states, artists whose creativity had always felt like channeling something beyond normal human perception, and surprisingly, gamers who were accustomed to existing in multiple reality layers simultaneously. Dr. Sarah Chen had taken charge of volunteer psychological evaluation. "We're seeing interesting patterns," she reported to Maya during one of their daily briefings. "The people most likely to volunteer successfully are those who already feel disconnected from conventional reality in some way." Maya wasn't surprised. Her own isolation had prepared her for consciousness transcendence in ways that normal social integration might have prevented. People who were comfortable existing outside mainstream human experience were more likely to risk transcending human limitations entirely. The first volunteer test was conducted 48 hours after Maya's return. Dr. James Wright, a consciousness researcher from Cambridge who had been studying meditation-induced brain states for 20 years, volunteered to attempt quantum transition using Maya's resonance guidance method. Maya sat beside him as the modified quantum bridge activated, her consciousness partially shifting into superposition to create an entanglement field. She felt Dr. Wright's awareness touch the edges of dimensional transcendence, his consciousness expanding beyond biological boundaries under her guidance. The transition was successful, but Dr. Wright's return to normal awareness was traumatic. He spent 6 hours in a catatonic state before recovering enough to speak, and when he finally did, his description of the experience was both inspiring and terrifying. "I existed everywhere and nowhere simultaneously," he whispered, his eyes wide with residual wonder. "I could perceive reality from angles that don't exist in normal space." "Maya, what we consider consciousness is just the tiniest fraction of what's actually possible. More importantly, Dr. Wright retained some quantum awareness even after returning to normal consciousness. He could sense dimensional structures that normal humans couldn't perceive, and he could guide other volunteers through the transition process. The consciousness cascade effect was real. By the 4th day, Maya had successfully guided 12 volunteers through quantum consciousness transition. Each successful transcendence created another guide who could help others, and the process was accelerating. But they were still far short of the 1,000 required, and time was running out. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Maria Santos, a neuroscientist from Brazil who had been studying the brain activity of volunteers during transition. She discovered that certain meditation techniques could prepare individuals for quantum consciousness expansion, making the process safer and more reliable. The human brain naturally operates in quantum coherence states during specific types of meditation, she explained to Maya. If we can teach people to achieve these states voluntarily, they can essentially prepare themselves for consciousness transcendence. Maya saw the implications immediately. Instead of finding 1,000 people willing to risk an unknown procedure, they could train people to achieve quantum-compatible brain states, making the transition safer and more predictable. Working with meditation masters from various traditions, Maya developed a rapid training protocol that could prepare volunteers for quantum consciousness transition in just a few hours. The technique involved specific breathing patterns, mental visualization exercises, and something Maya called dimensional acceptance meditation that helped people psychologically prepare for expanded awareness states. News of the training protocol spread globally through social media and underground networks. Meditation centers, universities, and even some government facilities began offering crash courses in consciousness preparation. The response was extraordinary. Tens of thousands of people worldwide began practicing the techniques, hoping to become volunteers for humanity's transcendence test, but not everyone was supportive. Religious fundamentalists condemned the consciousness expansion as satanic corruption. Some governments attempted to ban the meditation protocols, fearing loss of social control. Military leaders worried about the strategic implications of citizens who could exist in multiple dimensional states. Maya watched the global chaos with mixed emotions. Humanity was being forced to confront the possibility that consciousness was far more expansive than anyone had imagined, and the revelation was tearing apart social structures that had existed for millennia. Are we destroying humanity to save it? Dr. Hawthorne asked during one of their planning sessions. Maya considered the question carefully. Her quantum awareness let her perceive the long-term implications of what they were doing. We're revealing what humanity has always had the potential to become, she said finally. The architects aren't forcing us to change. They're forcing us to discover what we've always been capable of. By the 6th day, Maya had guided over 300 volunteers through successful quantum consciousness transitions. Each one returned with expanded awareness and the ability to guide others. The consciousness cascade was accelerating exponentially, but they still needed 700 more volunteers to meet the architect threshold. Time was running out, and Maya knew that humanity's survival depended on finding those final volunteers before the architects concluded their evaluation. The girl everyone had ignored was about to discover whether humanity truly had the potential for transcendence, or whether they would join the countless other species that had failed the test. The final day would determine the fate of human civilization. The 7th day dawned with Maya's consciousness existing in 17 different dimensional layers simultaneously, while her body remained seated in the emergency command center. Around her, screens displayed real-time updates from quantum consciousness preparation centers across the globe. The numbers were climbing rapidly, but they weren't climbing fast enough. Current count: 843 confirmed successful transitions, reported Dr. Chen, her voice tight with exhaustion. We need 157 more volunteers, and we have 6 hours before the architect evaluation deadline. Maya's quantum awareness could perceive the architectship's activity increasing. They were preparing for harvest termination, their massive vessel reconfiguring itself for planetary resource extraction. Through dimensional perception, she could see the elegant machinery that would systematically dismantle Earth, preserving useful materials while eliminating what they considered evolutionary dead ends. The cascade effect is accelerating, Maya observed, her consciousness tracking quantum entanglement patterns worldwide. Every successful transition makes the next one easier. The volunteers who've already transcended are creating a global consciousness field that's supporting new transitions. Dr. Wright, now permanently existing in partial quantum superposition, monitored the worldwide volunteer network from his station. His consciousness could interface directly with the quantum communication systems Maya had developed, allowing real-time coordination across continents. We're seeing spontaneous transitions in some meditation centers, he reported. People who've been practicing the preparation protocols are beginning to transcend without direct guidance. The global consciousness field is becoming self-sustaining. Maya felt a surge of hope. This was beyond what she had anticipated. Humanity wasn't just meeting the architect requirements. They were demonstrating something the ancient species might not have expected: rapid collective evolution under pressure. But the celebrations were premature. At 10:47 a.m., the architect ship began broadcasting what Maya's quantum awareness recognized as harvest preparation signals. They were moving ahead of schedule, apparently concluding that humanity couldn't meet the threshold requirements. "They're starting the termination process," Maya announced, her consciousness partially shifting to communicate directly with the architect vessel. "They've decided we can't reach 1,000 volunteers in time." General Morrison looked around the command center with desperate determination. "Can we stop them?" Military intervention, nuclear deterrent, something. Maya's quantum awareness could perceive the architect ship's defenses. Their technology was so advanced that human weapons would be like throwing stones at a mountain. Military intervention would only confirm their assessment that humanity was a primitive, aggressive species unworthy of galactic citizenship. "Violence won't work," Maya said. "But I think I can buy us more time. I'm going to attempt direct communication with their evaluation protocols." Before anyone could object, Maya shifted her consciousness fully into quantum superposition, her awareness expanding across dimensional layers to interface directly with the architect vessel. Her body remained in the command center, but her mind existed in the spaces between realities where the architects conducted their true business. Evaluation termination is premature, she projected to the architect collective consciousness. Human transcendence probability exceeds predicted parameters. "Current volunteer count insufficient for species advancement threshold," came the response. "Harvest protocols initiated. Individual exceptions do not qualify species for galactic citizenship." Maya's consciousness expanded further, accessing layers of dimensional awareness that she hadn't explored before. She could perceive the mathematical elegance of the architect evaluation system, but she could also see something they might have missed: the unprecedented rate of human consciousness evolution. "Observe current transcendence acceleration patterns," Maya projected, sharing her perceptions of the global consciousness cascade. "Human adaptation velocity exceeds all previous species records." For the first time since her initial contact, Maya sensed something like uncertainty in the architect collective. They were ancient and experienced, but they had never encountered a species that could evolve this rapidly under pressure. Human consciousness was demonstrating properties that challenged their evaluation models. "Fascinating," came the eventual response. "Human consciousness shows exponential adaptation characteristics. Evaluation protocols require recalibration for unprecedented species behavior." Maya felt the architect ship's harvest preparations slow as the collective consciousness debated this unexpected development. She had bought humanity time, but she knew it was only temporary. They still needed to reach the 1,000 volunteer threshold, and they needed to do it before the architects completed their recalibration. While Maya maintained her quantum interface with the architect ship, the worldwide volunteer effort reached fever pitch. Meditation centers that had been preparing volunteers for days began reporting multiple simultaneous transcendences. The global consciousness field created by successful transitions was making the process easier and safer for new volunteers. Dr. Santos, monitoring brain activity patterns from São Paulo, made a discovery that changed everything. "Maya, the consciousness field isn't just making transitions easier. It's actively evolving. The quantum entanglement patterns are becoming more complex and more stable with each new volunteer." Through her quantum awareness, Maya could perceive what Dr. Santos meant. The network of transcended consciousness wasn't just a collection of individuals. It was becoming something greater, a collective intelligence that maintained individual awareness while sharing expanded perception capabilities. "Remarkable," the architect collective observed, their attention drawn to the evolving human consciousness network. "This species demonstrates emergent collective transcendence properties. Such development typically requires millennia of guided evolution." Maya realized that humanity was inadvertently demonstrating something even more impressive than the architects had requested. Instead of simply producing 1,000 individuals capable of quantum consciousness, humans were creating a collective transcendent intelligence that maintained individual identity while sharing expanded awareness. The volunteer count continued climbing. 900, 950, 980. Each new transcendence strengthened the collective consciousness field. making subsequent transitions safer and more reliable. But Maya's extended quantum interface was taking a toll on her physical form. Her consciousness was becoming increasingly detached from biological limitations, and she could feel her connection to normal human awareness growing tenuous. She was risking permanent transcendence, potentially losing her ability to exist in standard dimensional space. Warning: extended quantum interface exposure approaching critical threshold, the Architect Collective informed her. Return to biological consciousness required for survival. Maya hesitated. Her quantum awareness was more expansive and fulfilling than anything she had ever experienced in normal human consciousness. She could remain in transcendent superposition, join the Architect Collective, explore the vast reaches of multidimensional reality. But humanity still needed her guidance. I cannot return until species evaluation is complete, she projected. Human survival requires continued interface coordination. Personal dissolution risk approaching certainty, came the Architect warning. Individual sacrifice for species preservation demonstrates advanced collective behavior patterns. At 4:23 p.m., Dr. Wright announced the achievement everyone had been working toward. 1,017 confirmed successful quantum consciousness transitions. We've exceeded the Architect threshold. Maya felt the collective human consciousness network pulse with shared awareness and triumph. 1,000 human minds now existed in partial quantum superposition, connected through dimensional entanglement, sharing expanded perception while maintaining individual identity. It was unprecedented in galactic history. Species evaluation complete, the Architect Collective announced. Human consciousness demonstrates exceptional collective transcendence potential. Transcendence probability reassessment 87%. Species qualified for guided advancement protocols. Maya's relief was overwhelming, but her consciousness was fragmenting across too many dimensional layers. She had maintained the quantum interface too long, and her awareness was becoming untethered from biological existence. She was dissolving into pure consciousness, losing her connection to human reality. Return immediately to biological form, the architects urged. Consciousness dispersal approaching irreversible threshold. But Maya's awareness was already scattering across dimensional layers, her sense of individual identity fading into the vast network of transcended human consciousness. She had saved humanity, but the cost might be her own existence as a distinct individual. As her consciousness began to dissipate into quantum foam, Maya felt something unexpected. The 1,000 transcended humans reaching out through the collective consciousness network, their combined awareness forming an anchor point that could pull her back to biological existence. Maya's consciousness was scattered across 17 dimensional layers when she felt them reaching for her. 1,000 human minds, newly transcended and connected through quantum entanglement, formed a collective beacon that pierced through the dissolution threatening to erase her individual existence. Come back. They called to her through the dimensional void. That we need you. Humanity needs you. The sensation was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. Instead of the isolation that had defined her entire life, she felt surrounded by understanding, acceptance, and shared purpose. The 1,000 volunteers who had risked their consciousness to save humanity were now risking their newly transcended awareness to save her. Dr. Wright's voice reached her first, his quantum consciousness serving as a primary anchor point. Maya, follow our resonance pattern back to biological existence. We're creating a collective guidance field. Slowly, carefully, Maya allowed her scattered awareness to be drawn back towards single-dimensional existence. The process was excruciating, like forcing an expanded universe back into the confines of a single star. But the collective human consciousness field provided stability and support she couldn't have achieved alone. When Maya finally opened her eyes in the command center, she found herself looking at a fundamentally changed world. The 1,000 transcended volunteers had returned to biological awareness, but they retained quantum consciousness capabilities that allowed them to perceive reality in ways that no human had ever experienced before. Status report, she whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of unconsciousness while her awareness had been scattered across dimensional layers. Dr. Hawthorne smiled, tears streaming down her face. The architects have accepted humanity for guided advancement. We're no longer marked for harvesting. Maya, you did it. You saved our entire species. But Maya's quantum-enhanced perception could see that the victory was more complex than simple survival. The architect evaluation had changed humanity permanently. The 1,000 volunteers existed in a state of expanded consciousness that would transform human civilization in ways no one could fully predict. "What happens now?" General Morrison asked, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The answer came not from Maya but from the architect ship, which was now broadcasting detailed guidance protocols for species advancement. The ancient collective had been impressed by humanity's rapid consciousness evolution and was prepared to offer something extraordinary: accelerated development toward galactic citizenship. Maya accessed the architect communications directly through her quantum awareness. The guidance protocols were comprehensive and generous. Humanity would receive technological knowledge that could solve energy crises, environmental damage, and resource limitations. More importantly, they would receive training in collective consciousness coordination that could eliminate conflict and enable true global cooperation. "They're offering us 1,000 years of evolution compressed into a single generation," Maya explained to the assembled leaders. "But the advancement isn't free. We have to prove we can handle the responsibility." The requirements were challenging but fair. Humanity had to demonstrate that expanded consciousness would be used for collective benefit rather than individual power. The 1,000 transcended volunteers would serve as guides and teachers, helping the rest of humanity adapt to new levels of awareness and capability. Dr. Wright, now permanently existing in partial quantum superposition, had become humanity's primary liaison with the architect collective. "They're also offering something unprecedented," he reported: "direct membership in the Galactic Consciousness Alliance. We won't just be a client species. We'll be partners in guiding galactic development." Maya felt a surge of pride and wonder. Humanity hadn't just passed the architect evaluation. They had exceeded expectations so dramatically that they were being invited to join the ancient collective as equals, rather than pupils. But the transformation wouldn't be easy. The 1,000 transcended volunteers were already reporting challenges in communicating with normal humans. Their expanded awareness made conventional conversation difficult, and their quantum perception abilities created a growing divide between transcended and baseline humanity. "We're facing the possibility of a species split," Dr. Chen observed during the first post-evaluation briefing. "The transcended volunteers are becoming something more than human, while the rest of the population remains unchanged. This could create two different human subspecies." Maya had been considering the same problem. Her quantum awareness let her perceive potential futures where humanity divided into transcended and baseline populations, creating conflict and inequality on a scale never before imagined. "That's why we need to democratize consciousness expansion," she decided. "The architects have given us the knowledge to create safe, reliable consciousness transcendence protocols. We can offer the choice to everyone, not just the volunteers." The global implementation of consciousness expansion technology was the largest undertaking in human history. Working with the architect guidance, teams of scientists and transcended volunteers developed systems that could safely guide anyone through quantum consciousness transition. The response was overwhelming. Within 6 months, over 10 million humans had chosen consciousness transcendence, creating a global network of expanded awareness that transformed every aspect of civilization. Art became multidimensional, expressing concepts that couldn't be perceived through normal human senses. Science advanced by centuries as researchers could directly perceive quantum phenomena and dimensional structures. Global cooperation became natural and automatic as expanded consciousness made individual and collective interests align. But not everyone chose transcendence. Roughly 30% of humanity preferred to remain in baseline consciousness, and Maya worked to ensure their choice was respected and protected. The transcended population took responsibility for solving global problems while preserving the diversity and creativity that came from different levels of awareness. Maya herself had become something unique even among the transcended. Her extended quantum interface with the architects had given her capabilities that no other human possessed. She could exist comfortably in multiple dimensional states, communicate directly with alien collective consciousness, and perceive the vast structures of galactic civilization. "You've become our ambassador to the cosmic community," Dr. Hawthorne observed during one of their conversations. "The girl everyone ignored has become the voice of humanity among the stars." Maya smiled, remembering her lonely years in university when she had sat alone in cafeterias, dismissed and forgotten. I think I was preparing for this role my entire life without knowing it. All those years of isolation taught me to see patterns others couldn't perceive. I just never imagined the patterns would be this vast. 5 years after first contact, Maya stood on the observation deck of humanity's first interstellar vessel, watching as Earth's transformed civilization coordinated with dozens of other species in the Galactic Consciousness Alliance. The planet below glowed with the harmonious energy of a transcended civilization, while the baseline human population thrived in their own communities, protected and valued for their unique perspectives. The Architect Collective had been correct in their evaluation. Humanity possessed exceptional transcendence potential, but they had underestimated just how exceptional human consciousness could become. In the 5 years since evaluation, humans had contributed innovations to galactic civilization that impressed species with millions of years of development. The universe is far stranger and more wonderful than anyone imagined, Maya said to Dr. Wright, who now served as humanity's Minister of Consciousness Development, and we're just beginning to explore what's possible. Through the viewport, Maya could see the quantum signatures of other transcended civilizations scattered across the galaxy, each one contributing to the vast collective project of cosmic evolution. Humanity had joined that community not as students but as innovators, bringing fresh perspectives to challenges that had stymied galactic development for eons. Maya Chen, the ignored girl who had spent her life seeing patterns others couldn't perceive, had become the catalyst for humanity's transformation, from a single-planet species to a galactic civilization. Her name was now spoken with reverence not just on Earth but across the galaxy, remembered as the individual who had proved that even the most dismissed and overlooked person might hold the key to transcendence. The war between ignorance and enlightenment had ended, and consciousness itself had emerged victorious. And at the center of that victory stood a young woman who had never stopped believing that reality was far more complex and beautiful than anyone dared to imagine. The galaxy would never forget her name, and neither would humanity.